Welcome to Frank's Self-Love and Self-Empowerment channel. I would like to share a few stories about my relationship to self-love and why self-love has become important in my own life. I was about 17 years old when I bought this book. It's called Die Kunst des Liebens by Erich Fromm. In English it's called The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm. I remember reading this book and I thought it's really fascinating to find out more about love and especially how does one love. And I remember in about the middle of the book there was a section on self-love. And just reading this word self-love, something in me became ignited. And I thought, wow, that's what I need. I need to learn to love myself because deep inside I knew I don't really love myself. And I remember I was so disappointed because he only wrote 5 pages about self-love in this entire book. And I wished I could read an entire book just about self-love. But there was really nothing that I could find about self-love at the time. But what I really liked reading about it is that he says most people believe that loving yourself is a sort of a selfish, egotistical thing to do. And in these 5 pages, he sort of helped the reader to understand that loving yourself is really the foundation to love another. And so in some way he helped me to create a positive relationship to the entire idea of loving myself. But although he wrote positively about loving oneself, I still had no idea what it means to love oneself and even less how to do that. I remember as a small boy that I really did not like emotions. Because at the time I felt a lot of sadness, a lot of heaviness and a lot of feelings I could not even describe where they came from. I also had a lot of anger inside of me. And all these emotions, they sort of were bearing heavy on myself, on my body, on my consciousness. And it felt like that I was carrying something heavy around in my life. And I associated heaviness and unhappiness with emotions. And I remember thinking, I wish I could take a knife and stab all these emotions and sort of cut it out of myself. Take them and then bury that somewhere in the garden. And so if I would have no more emotions, then I finally could just be happy. And only much later in life I started to understand that these heavy, dark, uncomfortable emotions were experiences from my early childhood which I have not learned to relate to in a conscious and loving way. And because I could not relate to them in a conscious and loving way, these emotions stayed within me in this heavy form. And I experienced this like a dark cloud hovering over me. And wherever I went, this dark cloud would follow me. And I remember being a teenager and feeling everybody's happy, but somehow there's this dark cloud, this heaviness, this sort of depressing energy that follows me wherever I go. And only much later in life I found out that in order to clear this heaviness, in order to clear these emotions, I need to learn to love myself with all of my emotionality. But again, I still didn't know how. So years went by, and only much later the topic of self-love came back into my life. And it was at the time when me and my wife decided to separate. We separated because we had different goals in life. She wanted to have a family and a child, and I just felt deep inside that I'm not ready for it, that I need more time. But she felt her time is now and that she doesn't want to wait anymore. And so we both decided, okay, then it's best that we separate. And although we were both very clear on it and we separated on a friendly basis, it still was a very painful experience for me. And I remember I was already working with clients at the time. I remember coming home around 7 or 8 in the evening. It was sort of November, and usually it already gets dark very early. And so I came to the house, opened the door, and there was nobody there. It was just me and an empty house. And somehow I was not motivated to make dinner, and so I just went to the living room, sat on the sofa. And as I was sitting there, I just felt this immense sadness in my heart. I felt terribly lonely. I really missed my wife. I missed her tenderness. I missed her affection. I missed our conversations. I missed our meals. But she was gone and there was no way for her to come back. But what remained was this sadness, this loneliness, and this feeling of lack of love in my own life. And I thought, what am I doing now? How can I be with this sadness? How can I be with this absence of love in my own life? So I just sat there, was feeling all this sadness and grief. And I was thinking, what is life all about? What's the meaning of life? And the first word that came to my mind was love. And then I was thinking about love. Yes, I've experienced love. I've experienced love in relationship, and I also have experienced love on a transcendental level, which is another story. But I also realized I don't really know what it means to love. How do you really love? And even less I knew how to love myself. And so I was sitting there on the sofa in this dark room, in this dark living room, and was thinking, so what do I do? Do I go out there and look for another sweet woman who gives me sweet love, who gives me tenderness, who gives me affection? So do I just look for another woman and start a new relationship? Is that the solution? But deep inside I knew that if I don't learn to relate to the sadness, this pain, if I don't learn to relate whatever it is that is uncomfortable within myself, I will never be able to learn to love myself. And so that night, this deep question came up in me, and that was, how do I learn to love myself? How do I learn to give myself the kind of love that I have always expected to come from another, to come from someone else out there? And at some point, I wrote this book, The Art of Self-Love. Loving yourself is the key to happiness. In a way, this book emerged out of these feelings of loneliness, out of this feeling of I don't know how to love myself. And what I developed was a method to relate to myself, to my sadness, my fear, my anger, my loneliness in a conscious and loving way. It was my own suffering that directed me towards learning to relate to my own negativity, to my own darkness, to all these, in quotes, shadow layers within myself, and to learn to relate to them in a conscious and loving way so that they can begin to transform. I will share more stories in the future about myself and my own journey and how I have learned to relate to myself in a conscious and loving way. But for now, I just would like you to know that if you feel heavy, if you feel sad, if you feel depressed, if you feel you don't like yourself, if you feel you have low self-esteem, if you feel you have low self-confidence, you are not alone. I have been there where you are. And there are moments, I still have times when I feel down, when I feel, who am I? I will never succeed. I can't do it. Who likes me? What have I done with my life? I'm just a nobody. I will never succeed. So it's quite natural that these thoughts come up, but we don't need to stop there. There's a way that you, me, everyone can learn to relate to these thoughts, to these feelings, to these emotions in a conscious and loving way. And we all can learn to transform them as they come up. And it's okay when they come up. It's natural that sometimes we hit low points. It's natural in life that we are faced with challenges, and sometimes we feel overwhelmed. Sometimes we might feel, my God, I don't know how to solve this issue. My God, I don't know if I will ever get out of that challenge. But that's okay. That's part of the journey. But what's important is that we don't give up. What's important is that we don't keep putting ourselves down, that we don't keep attacking ourselves, that we don't keep criticizing ourselves, but that we set a limit, a stop to that, and that then we begin to relate to ourselves in a conscious way first, so that we can become aware of what's going on, of what's happening in our own lives, and then that we can relate to these experiences, to these contents of experience in a conscious and loving way. May it be fear, may it be sadness, may it be loneliness, may it be anger, whatever it is. Any experience that we have needs to be related to in a conscious and loving way. Because that's the medicine, that's the remedy, that these emotions which have accumulated in our lives can begin to transform. And as we keep relating to these experiences, to this anger which you might not like, or the sadness which you might not like, or this fear which you despise, as you learn to relate to these experiences in a conscious and loving way, these experiences will begin to transform and they will begin to harmonize. And over time, you will feel much more calm, much more relaxed, and much more centered. And when you are centered, then you are capable to relate to yourself and to life in a much more resourceful, positive, self-empowered, and constructive way. So I hope that these few experiences of my life make you feel not so lonely, make you feel more understood, and help you understand why I have created this channel, why I'm talking about self-love and self-empowerment. I want you to know whatever you are going through, whatever you are experiencing, it's very, very important that you begin to relate to yourself in a conscious and loving way. And I also want you to know that you are not alone. Sometimes we don't like ourselves. Sometimes we have experiences that we don't like. Sometimes we go through experiences that trigger experiences in us which are difficult, which are hard to relate to. And that's the reason why I'm talking to you. And that's the reason why I'm creating this video channel, this YouTube channel, so that people can learn to start relating to themselves in a more conscious and loving way. And this book, The Art of Self-Love, is one way, one method which I developed so that you can learn to relate to yourself in a conscious and loving way, especially in these moments when you feel triggered, especially in these moments when you are faced with challenges, especially in these moments when you feel low, especially in these moments when you find yourself thinking very negative thoughts about yourself, and when you are very critical of yourself, and when the inner critic goes rambunctious, goes crazy on you and keeps putting you down. And that's the moment when it's important to set a limit to the inner critic, and when you need to learn to relate to yourself in a conscious and loving way. I hope you have enjoyed this recording, and I look forward to seeing you again. Take good care. Bye bye.